Greetings, everybody. It's Chris Islip here from the Montana World Affairs Council. Welcome to another episode of Global Perspectives on Security. This is our international affairs webcast that digs deeper into the international security issues of the day with our friend and partner, Mick Mulroy from the Lobo Institute in Whitefish, Montana. Mick is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, a retired CIA paramilitary operations officer and United States Marine. A national security analyst and co-founder of the Lobo Institute, he's a board member of the Plato Institute in Athens, Greece. Mick, I know you've been very busy over the past couple days talking with a lot of different people on the situation in Ukraine. So we would be very interested, of course, as always, to get your perspective, particularly the big headlines of the attacks on a wide array of civilian infrastructure in Ukraine by drones and its connection to the laws of war. Mick, can you help the layperson make sense of this?
Absolutely, Chris, and great to be with you. Essentially, President Putin has determined that he cannot militarily turn his bad fortunes around from his perspective in Ukraine. He's losing, and the Ukrainian counteroffensive is continuing to be successful. So he has decided essentially to start this effort, a terrorism effort, to use drones to essentially degrade, if not destroy, the infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, to reduce our ability to have power right before winter. So that is what he's doing now with these Iranian-built Shahed drones. And right now, the last I've seen, they've reduced their capacity for power almost 45%. So it is having an effect. It won't change the Ukrainian will to fight, but it certainly is having an effect, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
So we see on a lot of media the connection between these recent attacks and some other attacks and the laws of war. For most lay people, we see terms like laws of war. We see terms like genocide and terrorism thrown around a lot, but we often don't really understand what that might mean. Could you connect the dots on these attacks on civilian infrastructure and precisely what that means vis-a-vis the laws of war?
Absolutely. So after World War II, there was a series of conventions, the Hague Convention, the Geneva Convention, that really tried to make sure that what happened during World War II would not happen again. So that when armies fight armies, they fight armies. They don't fight innocent civilians. And if they do, it's a violation and a crime, and they should be held responsible, just like they were at the end of World War II. So because of that, you can, in a lawful war, which this is not, because they obviously invaded Ukraine unprovoked with no legal justification. But even then, it should be army against army. The Russians have specifically targeted civilians, both because they're launching missiles, rockets, and now drones directly against civilian targets. They're not valid military targets. That is a violation of the law of armed conflict. Clearly, it is a war crime. And that is why the international criminal courts have launched the largest investigation in their history in Ukraine, both for what's happened on the ground from soldiers doing horrible things to the civilian population, and now this direct assault on the civilian infrastructure and the civilians. So there's been many people that have been killed as a result of these latest string of cruise missiles and now drones.
Mick, just very briefly, I mean, can you just highlight what is the purpose of that law? Because for many, again, lay people, they consider maybe war to be a lawless situation. And when we hear the laws of war, maybe we don't truly understand what is the purpose of that.
So it is an attempt by the international community to make sure that war is not a lawless endeavor. It's obviously a horrible endeavor. I've seen it firsthand, even if done within the realm of international law, it's horrendous. But when it's outside, it even gets worse. And that is something that I think we should make sure never happens again. But unfortunately, it's happening right now in Ukraine. It looks like Because of the Russian inability to fight the Ukrainian army, they have turned to trying to terrorize civilians. And they've done this through essentially murder, execution, rape, and now the destruction of the Ukrainians' ability to essentially keep themselves warm through winters, which are pretty significant, something we should be really familiar with here in Montana. They're trying to take out their ability to essentially heat themselves during this winter. I don't think it'll work. The Ukrainians have shown incredible perseverance throughout this, but it's something that the entire international community should be up in arms against.
Mick, we're also seeing some information about the Iranian provision of these so-called kamikaze drones and their culpability in war crimes due to that provision. Is that also within the laws of war? What is the connection there?
So, Chris, that's a very good question. It is clear that they're providing these Shahed drones. They're the only ones that make them, and they're falling all over Ukraine. So their denial is nonsensical. They've gone beyond just providing weapons to a country that's using them in a conflict. They are now sending, according to the New York Times and several other media outlets, they are now providing trainers and advisors on the ground to Russians to more adequately use these drones to lethally target civilians. So that directly involves them in combat, and not just in combat, but in combat that's clearly in violation of the international rules that govern conflict. So they have now entered into the side with Russia, and I think they're equally culpable for everything that happens after that when it comes to these specific drones.
Mick, you've been talking with a lot of media sources and also with us over the past months, and you will often say that, you know, the United States policy ought to be very clearly in support of Ukraine at this moment, including the provision of weaponry. Has anything, Mick, on the ground or elsewhere changed your analysis?
So no, I think right now that we are the biggest supporter of Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting one of our most strategic, competitive adversaries, if you will, and that is important. Every dime that we spend helping the Ukrainians not only is on the right side of this conflict, the Ukrainians need the support, but it also degrades the ability of Russia to wage war elsewhere. So from the United States perspective, it is in our national security interest to help the Ukrainians and to provide the level of support that we have been providing, as well as NATO. And I would hope more countries around the world would come to their defense, as specifically with defensive weapons that are simply stopping the murder of civilians and the destruction of civilian infrastructure.
Thanks again. That's Mick Mulroy from the Lobo Institute, helping us make sense of a very complex issue. Mick, thank you so much for all of your help and support in in our webcasts. We surely do appreciate it and hope to see you in, say, another week or two. Until then, be well. Bye-bye.